Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. US President Donald Trump pauses tariffs on Mexico for a month whilst the two countries agree a deal on security and trade. Meanwhile, tariff threats still remain in place for the EU and UK as global markets wobble. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu arrives in Washington to discuss the second phase of the Gaza ceasefire. And beyond repair, government efficiency appointee Elon Musk works to shut down USAID. To our top story, and US President Donald Trump has acknowledged Americans will be impacted by his tariffs, but insists it is worth the price. Sweeping taxes on imports from Canada and China are due to come into effect on Tuesday, but a last-minute deal was struck with Mexico earlier today as the two countries agreed to take a pause as they discuss security and trade. Nick Harper reports from Washington.
Short-term pain for long-term gain. That's the message from the US president, who admits prices are about to go up as a result of his tariffs.
We may have short-term a little pain, and people understand that, but long-term, the United States has been ripped off by virtually every country in the world. We have deficits with almost every country, not every country, but almost, and we're going to change it.
25% tariffs start Tuesday on goods from Canada, 10% on Canadian oil, and a blanket 10% duty on all goods from China. The president suggesting those will remain until the countries make changes.
That have to balance out their trade, number one. That's got to stop people from pouring into our country, and we've stopped it. They haven't stopped it. We've stopped it. They have to stop people from pouring in, and we have to stop fentanyl, and that includes China.
Canada has responded by slapping 25% duties on billions of dollars worth of US imports. American liquor has reportedly been pulled from shelves, with a push to encourage residents to buy Canadian products. Economists and Democrats warn the new trade levies will slow US economic growth and drive up costs for consumers.
The good news is there are a good number of Republicans who don't like them either. And so I'm hopeful we can get bipartisan legislation to prevent the president from raising these tariffs, or once he does, to roll them back. Everything you were promised during the election is out the window if these tariffs go through.
And there could be more to come, with a threat of tariffs on Europe and possibly the UK as well. One silver lining, a late-breaking deal struck with Mexico on Monday morning, with the planned 25% tariffs on Mexican goods now on pause for a month. It may take some time before the true effects are felt by US consumers, but as prices and possibly inflation begin to creep up, there may be a sense of buyer's remorse from the 77 million Americans who voted for Donald Trump, the man who promised to bring down costs and boost the US economy. Nick Harper, Al Arabiya News, Washington.
Now, a pause may have been imposed in Mexico, but President Trump says EU tariffs will definitely happen. We can now go live to Brussels to speak to our correspondent there, William Denselow. William, good evening to you. Thank you for joining me. So today's meeting where you are in Brussels was meant to be really about security and defence, but this appears to have been overshadowed by tariffs. How are EU leaders reacting to Trump's threats?
Well, there's been a rather staunch and unified message from many European leaders. We heard from Donald Tusk, the Polish Prime Minister, who said that this would be a test of EU solidarity. We also heard a very strong message from French President Emmanuel Macron, who said this was an opportunity for the European Union to stand up for itself. We've also heard from a spokesperson for the European Commission saying that if indeed Donald Trump goes through with his threat of duties on EU goods, then they will respond firmly. That was a point very much reiterated by Kaja Kallas, the EU's top diplomat and foreign affairs chief. She said that they are working on a response if it's needed. She said, though, that there are essentially no winners in a trade war. And she added that China would be the ones laughing if indeed there was to be an escalation in a trade spat between the EU and the US, two historically close allies that account for around $1.6 trillion worth of trade every year, one of the biggest trade partnerships anywhere in the world.
Yes, indeed. And as you say, a tough and robust response there. But Trump's tariff threats for Mexico, Canada and China have been in relation to illegal migration and fentanyl supply. But what is his reason for taxing European Union goods?
Well, this trade relationship is enormous, around $1.6 trillion per year, according to 2023's figures. But Donald Trump claims that this is a lopsided relationship. Essentially, he is saying that the EU is sending far more products to the United States. Things like European cars are all over the European market, but in response, there are very few US goods here in Europe. That is the charge that Donald Trump claims and why he wants to see this addressed. But if we look at the figures, there is certainly a surplus when it comes to EU goods. But as far as the European Union is concerned, and something Commission officials have been saying in recent weeks, they say that is largely offset by US services that outweigh EU services. So they say that that essentially balances out if you look at both goods and services. So that's the strong argument from the EU. But whether it's enough to convince Donald Trump, well, seemingly the answer is no.
How will these potential tariffs affect European businesses and consumers? And could there be any kind of negotiation like we've just seen with Mexico before they're brought in?
A real question is what exactly would be targeted by the Trump administration. Perhaps we can go back in history and with some sense and get a sense of what exactly could be targeted. During his first term in office, if we cast our minds back to 2016, Donald Trump imposed tariffs on European steel and aluminium. Now, that is on pause, and that pause is set to expire this year, so we could see those tariffs come back into action at some point for steel and aluminium. So that's certainly one sector to look at. But essentially the message from Kaja Kallas is that there are no winners in this trade war, considering that it's a relationship that is so close. When it comes, though, to what could be done to potentially stave off the threat of a trade war, well, European officials have been trying to appease President Trump in recent weeks. We've heard from Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission president, who says that she is seeking a positive relationship with the US and that it would be pragmatic as well going forward. But she said that she would safeguard European interests. However, she has also suggested that the EU could conceivably take in and buy more US liquefied natural gas as a way of easing Donald Trump's perceived concerns about a trade imbalance. Whether that'll be enough to stave off the risk of tariffs, well, that'll certainly remain to be seen.
Yes, indeed, remain to be seen. William Denselow in Brussels, thank you so much. Let's get into this further with economist Laurie Laird. Laurie, great to have you on. US stocks dropped as Trump tariffs hit markets. Evening to you. What global reaction have we seen across the markets today to this uncertainty around tariffs?
We saw a big sell-off in Asian stocks. Japan was the biggest hit, which is sort of interesting because Japan seems to be out of the firing line, at least for the moment. We know that Donald Trump isn't too reluctant to put tariffs on allies, but Japanese markets down about 2.5%. Main Chinese markets are closed, of course, for the Lunar New Year. European markets down about 1%, a little bit more. And the U.S. markets opened down more than 1%, making up some of those gains at the moment. But to be honest, this isn't, it sounds like a dramatic reaction. And I've watched some of the headlines today, talking about this dramatic reaction. A 1%, 1.5% move in a large liquid equity market is not all that surprising. And I think that shows that we've expected these tariffs to come. Donald Trump, look, he campaigned on them. He's tariff man. So I don't think this hit the markets as much of a surprise. So, slightly concerning, but these are all markets that have done pretty well, particularly in Europe and the U.S. over the past couple of months. So I don't see any concerns about financial stability at the moment.
Yes, of course, Trump said on the campaign trail he loves the word tariff, so you're absolutely right there. But
best word in the English language, right?
Yeah, he did say that, yes, absolutely. But interesting turn of events, Laurie. I feel like we're going to see this a lot. Trump has paused tariffs on Mexico for a month. I want to know, do you think he's using tariffs as a blunt instrument, basically to get countries to agree to his demands? Is this Trump's negotiating tool?
Look, quite possibly. I'm not sure who is inside of Donald Trump's head, but what you're saying makes a great deal of sense for as much as we know. I mean, the fact that these tariffs were sort of dangled in front of trading partners for a while, sort of semi-announced on Friday, confirmed on Saturday, but not to take effect until midnight tonight, U.S. time. So it certainly gives the sense that Donald Trump was open to some sort of negotiation. And in fact, with the wheeling back of the tariffs of Mexico until the end of the month, does show you that Trump is open to negotiation. And this is something from his playbook. This is something Donald Trump has done in the past. Throw something out there, get a trading partner. We saw it with Colombia just last week when Donald Trump, was punishing the Colombians for not taking back some migrants. Throw something out there, clean up the mess, and then take credit for cleaning up a mess of your own making. It's a really interesting strategy. I think the other thing that's indicative of perhaps this was a negotiating ploy is that Donald Trump's Treasury advisors have been pretty silent about the merit of these tariffs, at least over the past couple of days. Scott Bessent, the new Treasury Secretary, thought to be one of the saner members, one of the more traditional members of the cabinet, has not been behind this. He has not been doing the television shows saying this is great for the U.S. economy, which suggests that the Treasury isn't 100% behind Trump on here, which again may suggest that perhaps this was a negotiating ploy.
Trump says he wants to use tariffs to tackle the trade deficit. We've heard him say that a lot. Is the U.S. trade deficit a huge problem many economists just aren't discussing?
I'm so glad someone has asked this question, because the merchandise trade balance, that's when that's the trade in goods, things like cars, steel, things that you can touch. That merchandise trade deficit is a real metric for Donald Trump in looking at the economy, along with the stock market. And I think the early fall in the stock market today may have been something that concerned Donald Trump. These aren't metrics that conventional economists would say would indicate the health of an economy. The U.S. economy is growing more quickly than any other major economy, except for perhaps Spain. Spain's hanging in there pretty well. Yet does run quite a big merchandise trade deficit. To a certain extent, that's an indication of America's strength. It means American consumers are feeling flush. They can afford imported products. And if you look at some of the world's biggest exporters right now, look at Germany, look at China. These are economies that are really struggling at the moment. So a trade surplus in the case of Germany or China is not necessarily a clean bill of economic health.
Economist Laurie Laird, thank you so much for your insights. Great to have you on the show.
Always a pleasure.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in Washington today ahead of his meeting with President Trump tomorrow. The two leaders are expected to discuss a second stage of the ceasefire in Gaza with Hamas. It'll be Trump's first meeting with the foreign leader since he returned to the White House last month. Earlier today, Netanyahu met with Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff. Let's go live to Tel Aviv to speak to our correspondent, Giles Gibson. Giles, thank you for joining me. So Trump took the credit for the Gaza ceasefire deal that we saw between Israel and Hamas, despite not being in power at the time. Steve Witkoff met Netanyahu today. What do we know about that meeting ahead of course, tomorrow's big meeting with Trump and Netanyahu?
Not a lot of details out there about this meeting between Netanyahu and the US Special Envoy for the Middle East, but what we believe is going on is really that they're just preparing the ground ahead of that all-important, closely watched meeting between the two leaders, Netanyahu and Trump, on Tuesday. Remember that this is now the 16th day of the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, and that means that, according to the agreement, negotiation talks are supposed to start in terms of how to move from this first phase of the agreement into the second phase. What we've been hearing from the Israeli Prime Minister's office is that they see this meeting between Netanyahu and Witkoff as really the start of that process. They then say, we've not had any confirmation of this from the American side, that Witkoff will speak later in the week with Egyptian and Qatari mediators. Before then, at some point, the Israelis will agree to sending an actual delegation to take part in sort of physical talks. We believe, once again, those talks could happen in Qatar, as they did to arrange the first phase, the initial agreement between Hamas and Israel.
We've seen 4 rounds of hostage and prisoner exchanges so far, lots of them chaotic scenes. What are we expecting from the second phase of the truth? As you said, those talks are expected to start. We know, Giles, the ceasefire has been extremely fragile.
Yeah, so let me just walk you through the rest of the first phase and then how the second phase could look like. What we're expecting, none of this is confirmed at this stage, is that we will see 3 more Israeli hostages released by Hamas in Gaza on Saturday. Then a week later, the next Saturday, 3 more. And then at some point before the end of February, before the 1st of March, which is when phase 1 expires, the rest of the total of 33 Israeli hostages being released. And in exchange, getting up to that number of 1,900 Palestinian prisoners who are being released in exchange for those 33 Israeli hostages in total. Then when we get onto phase 2, really the central planks of that are that the remaining hostages held in Gaza will be released, and at the same time, Israeli troops will have to completely withdraw from the Gaza Strip. But look, we have to stress here, there is absolutely no guarantee that the two sides move on from phase 1 to phase 2. I mean, just politically speaking here in Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu is in a very tough position because one of his far-right coalition partners, the finance minister Bezalel Smotrich, has threatened in the past that he will leave that coalition, take away Benjamin Netanyahu's governing majority as a result, if Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't go back to fighting Hamas in Gaza.
Giles Gibson in Tel Aviv, thank you so much for joining me. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. The Greek island of Santorini is on an earthquake alert after recording over 200 tremors since Friday. There have been no reports of damage or casualties so far, but authorities have closed schools and advised residents to stay away from ports and to drain swimming pools. 19 people are dead after a car bomb explodes in Syria. The explosion killed mostly female farm workers in Manbij, where Kurdish forces are reportedly battling Turkey-backed groups. No one has claimed the attack. The US Secretary of State has demanded Panama ends China's influence on the Panama Canal. Marco Rubio says Washington will take measures if the Central American nation does not take action immediately. And Beyoncé has won Best Album at this year's Grammy Awards. The singer was recognized for her work on Cowboy Carter. The Texan had been nominated for the same award 4 times before. In another effort to reduce US spending, tech billionaire Elon Musk is calling to shut down USAID. Musk, who is in charge of President Trump's Department of Government Efficiency, says the US Foreign Aid Agency is beyond repair, and it's believed Trump has agreed with Musk. It comes as 2 senior members of the Foreign Aid Organization were suspended after attempting to stop members of Musk's efficiency team from accessing secure files. We can now cross live to Washington to speak to our correspondent, Caroline Malone. Caroline, thank you for joining me. USAID is the world's largest single donor. Who will be impacted first, and what does it mean for global aid?
Absolutely. Well, directly already a number of the 10,000 people that work for USAID from the United States and then work as contractors globally have clearly been impacted by this very sudden action in which access to their offices went down. They were told to work from home on Monday, a lot of them being sent emails suggesting that they don't have future jobs and they're being offered resignations. But clearly, the huge impact, the knock-on impact, is going to be access to aid for many people around the world. USAID is responsible for something like $72 billion worth of humanitarian aid every year. It's also something like 42%, according to the United Nations, of all humanitarian aid given to other countries every year. So a hugely significant proportion of the types of aid that goes to people. And the programs it's been helping include women, for instance, in conflict zones, health crises, such as helping people in areas to stop the spread of HIV/AIDS, helping orphans who've become orphans as a result of health crises, helping people to get access to clean water. So, critically important health, water and conflict type aid scenarios that potentially now are losing all their funding to the tune of up to $72 billion. So a huge amount of aid could be lost because of the shutting down of this program. We are, though, hearing in the last couple of hours that USAID might actually be absorbed, what's left of it anyway, might be absorbed by the US State Department, and that Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, is currently acting as the admin for what's left of USAID. So potentially some programs might live, but huge concern for the majority of the aid that is usually given by the program.
Musk estimated the Trump administration can cut $1 trillion from the US deficit next year. How much will shutting down USAID actually save the taxpayer? And as you said, these could be absorbed, but where will these funds be diverted to?
Well, that's right. So, we're talking up to $72 billion that's currently spent approximately every year by the US on these types of aid programs. So that amount of money could be saved. But essentially, what President Trump and what DOGE, led by Elon Musk, is trying to do is reduce government spending because the US is in debt as a result of it, increasing debt every year. So really what this would do would potentially reduce the amount of debt that the government has. And it's a huge problem overall for President Trump because he has campaigned on reducing government debt. He's campaigned on reducing government spending. And he needs a lot of money at the same time for a lot of the programs that he has suggested, things such as his huge deportation plans, which could cost millions up to billions of dollars if he's trying to also secure the border as well. So in trying to do so, he actually needs more money. Things like, for example, for cutting taxes, corporate taxes is something he's also promised to do. And that's where you see a link here between these tariff threats and some that have come into action, as well as cutting spending of federal government spending at the level of the programs like USAID.
There have been some raised eyebrows over Elon Musk's assets to classified information, Caroline. Is this a gross abuse of power by an unelected bureaucrat, which has been suggested?
Well, it's certainly unusual to have someone like Elon Musk, or in this case, members of the DOGE team, so not Elon Musk himself initially, but going into the offices of USAID, demanding access to these very secure portals that hold a lot of information. They hold social security information, they hold personal data. So it is really sensitive information that they now, we believe, have access to. And that is something that has been questioned by a number of people, including by Democrat Peter Welch, who's a member of the Senate Finance Committee. He said it is an abuse of power, and it essentially shows how money can buy power in the Trump White House. That was part of an emailed statement that he sent out earlier. So really, looking at why it is that someone who's not elected into the government, wasn't part of the recent US election, has been nominated by Trump into the role, Musk, as the head of this efficiency department, should be given access to this type of information. Of course, President Trump and his supporters saying that this is necessary. This type of dramatic action is important because they are trying to cut government spending, they're trying to cut wastefulness, and they're trying to cut spending that doesn't result in some benefit for the United States.
Caroline Malone, there's been a lot of dramatic action in Trump's first 15 days in power. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. Let's take a look at the top business news. Bitcoin has slumped to a 3-week low as the risk of a trade war spooks investors and causes a sell-off across financial markets. The world's biggest cryptocurrency is lower, around 6.2% today. Smaller cryptocurrency Ether has lost nearly 25% in value since Friday. Chinese app Shein has relaunched in India 5 years after it was banned by Delhi. The firm, Reliance Retail, has entered a long-term licensing deal with Shein's parent company to sell products manufactured in India on the platform. The fashion giant's re-entry into the Indian market comes with strict terms, which include saving all data within the country. Turning to sport now, the former president of Spain's Football Federation, Luis Rubiales, arrived in court today accused of sexual assault for kissing the player Jenny Hermoso. The Spanish female forward has appeared as a witness after accusing Rubiales of kissing her without her consent on the World Cup medal podium. Rubiales denies the charges. And Aston Villa have completed the loan signing of Manchester United forward Marcus Rashford. The 27-year-old has joined on a deal until the end of the season, which includes an option to buy him for £40 million. Rashford joined Manchester United's youth squad at the age of 7. Drug manufacturers in India are concerned as President Donald Trump rolls out tariffs against China, Mexico and Canada. Trump has threatened to impose similar tariffs on India as well, which is the world's biggest drug supplier. Industry players are now worried about a potential impact, as an Ishnan Garg reports from New Delhi.
The Indian firm BioPlus is a crucial supplier of these medicines to the United States. Indian products made up nearly half of all prescription drugs sold in the country in 2022. BioPlus is now worried that if President Donald Trump acts on his campaign rhetoric of imposing tariffs as high as 100% on Indian imports, it could drive up manufacturing costs by 20%.
The U.S. is expected to be our largest market going forward. To that extent, it will have an impact on BioPlus. Or, any of the large Indian pharmaceutical companies have a large investment today or a large revenue stream today in the United States. So yes, we will all be impacted.
A more long-term concern for Indian firms is America's new Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. who has promoted ideas of holistic healing over modern medicines. He has also criticized vaccines, even reportedly asking the US Food and Drug Administration to deny approvals to COVID-19 shots during the pandemic. Indian drug companies, who churn out more than half the world's vaccine supply, are now worried about substantial changes to the US's regulatory and drug approval policies.
If you attend global pharmaceutical congresses and conferences, all they do is talk about is our friend Mr. Kennedy and how disruptive he could potentially be.
There is some glimmer of hope, though, as the US looks to reduce its reliance on Chinese imports, offering Indian firms a chance to fill the gap. Though Indian medicines also use Chinese ingredients, America's pivot away from China-made drugs is already benefiting Indian companies, according to experts. India's overall pharma exports to the US rose 15% to $8.7 billion last year. Experts say India's contract drug manufacturing business could benefit from the US's Biosecure Act 2024, which prohibits procurement from some of China's biggest drug makers by 2032.
India is also moving from the generic drugs to novel drugs, and there are a lot of drugs being off-patented in the US. Huge opportunity will come into India's way. We are targeting export of $100 billion by 2030.
BioPlus says constant innovation could help them overcome uncertainties in the long run. But for now, they, like many other Indian pharmaceutical companies, are bracing for potential disruptions under Donald Trump's second term in office. Ishan Garg, Al Arabiya News, New Delhi.
A reminder of our top stories. US President Donald Trump pauses tariffs on Mexico for a month whilst the two countries agree a deal on security and trade. Meanwhile, tariff threats still remain in place for the EU and UK as global markets wobble. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu arrives in Washington to discuss the second phase of the Gaza ceasefire. And beyond repair, government efficiency appointee Elon Musk works to shut down USAID. And that's all from us on W News. Thank you so much for joining us. A special interview with Manolis Kellis, Professor of Artificial Intelligence and Computer Science at MIT. That's coming up next. And of course, don't miss Tom Burgess-Watson with GNT. Good night and thank you for joining me.